play hard, make crap, learn fast.
Most leaders think creativity is a personality trait. It's not. It's a decision. It's a skill. And the culture you build either makes the decision easier or harder for every person on the team. The best ideas don't come from the most confident person in the room. They come from the culture that makes it safe enough to try. I'm Dr. Gary, and this is Leading from the Front. Melissa Dinwiddie spent years as a professional artist and Juilliard-trained dancer before she started working with some of the most innovative companies in the world. You know, companies like Google, Meta, Salesforce. What she found inside those organizations surprised her. The biggest obstacle to innovation wasn't resources or strategy. It was the way people had been conditioned to think. In this conversation, she uses the experience to help us understand what leaders can actually do to unlock creative thinking on their teams. When you think about innovation and creativity and perfectionism, to me, the two are oxymorons.
Yes.
A perfect innovation, right? A perfect creative process. It's an oxymoron. To be creative, to be innovative takes a lot of practice and a lot of mistakes, I guess you could call them, right? But I'll bet you don't call them mistakes. What do you call them?
Well, it really takes a lot of willingness to take risks. Being creative requires us to step outside of our comfort zones. That is where creativity lives. Because if you think about it, if it's creative, it means it hasn't been done before. And if it's been done before, then it's inside of our comfort zones. And so the act of doing something creative means that we're combining ideas together that haven't been combined in a way that's been done before. It means trying something new. It means taking that risk to step outside of what we already know. That's scary. That means we might make a mistake. We might fail. We might fall flat on our faces. It's really scary. And it is, by definition, the opposite of perfectionism. Perfectionism means that we can't try anything that might end up in us falling flat on our faces. So we never take any risks. That's what perfectionism is. So yeah, you are absolutely right. It's an oxymoron, creativity and perfectionism.
Here's what this means specifically for leaders, because perfectionism is, first of all, in business is expensive. In an artist, it means that their work never ships. In fact, my mom was an artist. She made these beautiful paintings. In fact, some of them are right behind me here. And I can remember her talking about times when she was painting and have to redo an entire painting. She'd scrape all the oil off of the canvas and start all over again. Because you see, a lot of times artists really look at their work as just being good enough. It's never perfect, but it's never done unless you say it's done. And in business, there's times when we have to say good is good enough. The question isn't how you balance creativity and perfection. It's whether your culture has made it safe enough for people to be wrong. I asked Melissa to walk me through a real situation. A team that was struggling to get their ideas heard. What she described is one of the most common and most avoidable leadership failures we see.
It is a really tough balance. And, when I come in and work with companies, usually it's some brave manager is reaching out to solve a very specific challenge that they have. For example, during the pandemic, a contact that I had who was embedded with a research team at Facebook, they were really struggling with morale, but they were also struggling with some very specific communication challenges. They were really struggling with problems around communicating for influence. They were having problems with their brilliant insights that these researchers were, coming up with in their research were not spreading across the organization. Why were they not spreading across the organization? Because they were not effective at communicating them. Why were they not effective at communicating them? A lot of different reasons. One, these are people who are highly, highly educated. Most of them have PhDs, and the way that they're used to communicating is arguing their point, digging in, getting really sort of aggressive in their way of communicating. Not effective in this corporate environment that they're in. And that was another challenge that this team was having. Was they're like, here's my point, here's what I want to say, here's the thing, I don't want to listen to you. And that was really hindering them and hampering them and getting in their way. So that was another problem that they were having.
That one word shift from my perspective to a perspective. It's deceptively simple. We see this with leaders sometimes where they use that one word that people don't want to hear. It's called I or my or me. And we need to shift that to we or to the or to a. But what it signals to the people around you is enormous. It tells them the ideas belong to the conversation, not to you or to me. And when leaders make that shift, something changes in the room. People start contributing instead of defending. Yeah.
Another challenge was that they used a lot of jargon. And so whatever they were sharing was just going in one ear and out the other when they were trying to communicate it to their cross-functional teammates or whoever they were talking to, because they were speaking researchese. And the only other people that speak researchese are other researchers, but they
Right.
were talking to people who were not researchers. And
Mm,
so that was not helping
mm.
them. They were also had a tendency to bury the lead and just fire hose people with tons of information rather than sharing the top line. What's the most curiosity inducing, most important little snippet of information that's going to grab someone's curiosity and get them really interested to learn more? From their perspective, as the researcher, everything's important and they want to tell you everything, but that's
Yep.
not the most effective way to actually communicate your point.
I've done this as a facilitator. Somebody says something, somebody starts to respond. They go, stop. I want you to tell me what the other person said before you respond. So we get into this behavioral loop where people aren't allowed to speak without first paraphrasing back to the person what they
Yes,
heard, right?
yes, yes.
So you're forcing them to listen. And one of the things we go even further than that, Melissa, I don't know if I'm sure you've done this, not just to feedback the content and the paraphrase, but what do you think the emotion was with it?
Dr. Gary, these are
Yep.
so similar to activities that I do in my Communicating for Influence program.
Yes. I asked Melissa for a specific example, a moment where these ideas actually worked in practice. What she shared is one of the clearest illustrations I've heard of what it looks like when a leader makes the shift from, why isn't this person getting it, to, what do I need to do differently?
I'll tell you the opposite. I'll
Okay.
tell you about
All
a
right.
leader who did get it. And this was one of my favorite activities that I do in this particular program, as it happens, the Communicating for Influence program. And the reason I'm talking about this program is because the work that I do around innovation, I talk about working in the area of the 3 C's: connection, communication, and creativity. It's like a
Okay.
3-legged stool.
Yep.
Innovation lies at the intersection of these 3 C's. If any one of these 3 is broken in your organization, innovation's not happening. So in this particular program, which is a subset of my innovation work, one of my favorite activities I call Time Traveler. Now, I didn't invent this activity, but I love to use it. I pair people up. Person A is from the present time, everything's normal for them, and person B is a time traveler from 500 years ago. And the brief is person A has to explain a modern device like a cell phone to person B. But the catch is that, think about it, person B is quite likely to think that person A is a witch.
Crazy. A witch. That's or crazy.
They're
Okay.
going to
Yes.
condemn them to burn at the stake for witchcraft.
That's
So
right.
before I send them off into their breakouts, we brainstorm for a couple minutes what would be different for that time traveler. How is life different for them? Oh, they don't have electricity, they didn't have modern medicine, et cetera, et cetera. And then I send them off into their breakouts. They have 2 minutes. This is an impossible activity,
Mm-hmm.
Dr. Gary. I've done
Mm-hmm.
it myself. It is impossible,
Yep.
but it's hilarious. It's funny. It's a lot of fun. And then I bring them back and I ask people, okay, how many witches are in the room? And invariably half the room raises their hands. But I ask the folks, the time travelers, did any of your partners do anything that was successful? And of course, somebody did something that was successful. And it is always they use some sort of an analogy that made sense in my life context. So,
Yeah.
light bulbs start to go off above people's heads, and then they get a chance to switch roles. I give them a different scenario. It's not a cell phone this time, it's something else. They go off into their breakouts. We come back, and there's a higher success rate. It's not 100%, but there's a higher success rate. And they start to really think. And then we debrief, okay, what does this have to do with your day-to-day work life? Now, with the research teams, these are all folks who are working in cross-functional teams. So they have to interact with non-researchers all the time. And one of my favorite stories from this scenario is somebody who came back the following week, because these programs run over multiple weeks, and I give them homework to run an experiment. over the course of the week between one session and the next. And this particular leader came back and shared that she was in a conversation with one of her cross functional teammates and it wasn't going well. She was trying to explain something and he just wasn't getting it. And she was getting so frustrated.
Mm,
And finally, she realized, wait a minute, he's not being difficult and he's certainly not stupid. He just has a completely different context.
that's
And
right.
I have to figure it's on me. It's not his fault. It's on me. I have to figure out what is an analogy that I can use to make it clear to him. And she was able to do that just by stepping outside for just a quick second and figuring out what is that analogy. And he got it. And he was able to come up with some more ideas that she couldn't even see. And she was so excited when she came back the following week and reported this experience. And I tell you, Dr. Gary, I get this kind of feedback from that one activity all the time. That's why it's one of my favorites.
That moment when she stopped being frustrated with him and asked herself what analogy would land in his world, that's a leadership decision. Most people in that situation keep pushing harder with the same message. They keep repeating themselves, thinking that, well, maybe they'll get it next time. The best communicators stop and ask a different question to themselves. What does this person actually need to hear, and in what language? Next, I asked Melissa why this exercise works so well inside organizations. What is it actually doing for leaders?
The first thing that it does is it enables them to step into somebody else's shoes.
Ding, 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 ding. Isn't that really the key to the whole thing, right?
Yeah,
Is if you're communicating, you got to understand where the other person's coming from.
absolutely.
That's so important that I didn't want to miss the point because people don't realize it's simply knowing where the other person's coming from.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then to your point, it's being creative enough to figure out, how do I take my thought, my idea, what I want to communicate, and put it into terms that that person will understand? And
Yeah.
that's where the creative process comes in, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And the reason why this particular activity is so powerful and so effective and impactful is because it's immersive, it's experiential, and it's fun. So people go through an experience. I'm not
Mhm.
just doing a death by PowerPoint and telling them, you must get in your
Right.
audience's shoes. You need to
Yeah.
communicate better. You need
Yeah.
to understand
Yeah.
your audience.
Understand your audience. That's right. Okay. So the other part that you were talking about, their style of communicating. And typically, when you look at a Myers-Briggs profile, for example, the introvert, extrovert, an introvert and a high detailed person will give you all the details so that you can get to the conclusion. And a lot of PhDs who do research do think in those terms. I've got to give you all and yet the dissertation that they write, chapter 1 of a dissertation is the summary. Okay. The first page of a business plan or a marketing plan is a summary. And what does the summary tell them? It tells them what they're going to support in all the data and the documentation that they're about to share.
Yeah.
Some people, I'm a very, very strategic thinker, big picture, kind of, somewhat extroverted. I'm actually kind of a low level extrovert. But if you start a conversation with me without telling me what the purpose of the conversation is, what the topic is, if you just start giving me data, you will lose me in about 15 seconds. I'm done. I have no, I always say, you got to talk to me. Tell me what the bucket is. What bucket am I putting this information in? And
Yeah.
once I know what bucket I'm putting it in, when I was a VP of sales for companies, the Jefferson account. Okay, go ahead, keep talking. Because they would walk in and just start blatting out, I've worked on this and we're trying to get this margin. We're trying to sell these products. I'm like, whoa, whoa. What are you talking about? Oh, the Jefferson account. Thank you. Now keep talking. And I find that it's a style thing. And once we point out that behavioral style to walk in, like what you were saying, it's clear communication. It's an understanding of where the other person's coming from, but not just from an information, experience, and knowledge standpoint, but it's also from a communication style standpoint. You've got to put those two together in order to be able to be effective as
Yeah.
a leader and as a communicator. Everything else is anecdotal. Everything else is behavioral. Everything else is situational and contextual, but you have to have good decision-making judgment and a fairly high level of emotional intelligence, okay, in order to be effective as a leader. So one of the things that we talk about and we train and teach that is lacking, I think, a lot today is critical thinking. I see a parallel between creativity, innovation, and critical thinking. In fact, they may be one and the same. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, one of the things that I see as essential for
Mm,
creativity and innovation is psychological safety because people absolutely need to feel safe to take risks, to
mm.
present ideas, to try things, to fail and not be punished, not be sanctioned, not be, fired or demoted or
Or
just
demeaned,
shamed in
shamed.
any
Yeah.
way, and
Yes.
that is a problem in a lot of organizations.
And that is definitely a cultural value. It's either stated or unstated that we're going to treat each other with respect. If we have
Right.
conflict, we're going to have respectful conflict. And in that respectful conflict, we're going to be conflicting over the problem, not making it personal.
Yes.
Right. So that I think that is a foundational necessity in an organization that's going to be innovative and creative. Otherwise, you're right. People are emotionally going to withdraw, then they're going to
Yes.
intellectually withdraw, and then they're going to physically withdraw. And if they do withdraw, as we always say, we hope that they withdraw and quit. Otherwise, they quit and stay, and we
Right.
know what happens with that, right?
Right.
So we see that kind of downward slope. But let's assume we have that psychological safety. I think critical thinking in business is a foundational part of all the things that we're talking about in terms of creativity and innovation. We have to be able to ask the question, is this a fact? Is there another way of looking at this? It's having that critical mindset inside that questions everything at some level.
Absolutely, and I will yes and to that. In addition to that, there has to be an open mindset because one of the challenges with if everything is just critical thinking, critical thinking, critical
Mm.
thinking, that can lead down to this won't work, this won't work, this won't work.
This tension is real, and most organizations land on the wrong side of it. When you only push psychological safety without rigor, you get a culture where every idea is celebrated and nothing gets better. When you only push critical thinking without safety, people stop sharing ideas worth challenging. What we're actually trying to build is a culture where it's safe to be wrong and expected to think hard. Those two things together, that's where teams start doing their best. Critical thinking in a group is yes and. I want to make sure that we understand that when I say critical, I don't mean that I'm being
Judgment.
critical.
Yeah.
Right. It's not judgment. It's questioning perception, perspective, and asking the question, is this true? Is this data really telling me what I need to see? Is the market information that I'm getting actually true? It's kind of fascinating. I'm not going to get into politics, but how often they do all these polls and they're wrong like 90% of the time. How can they be so wrong all the time? It's like, so where's the critical thinking in looking at that? Or are they just giving you a message that they're hoping will affect the outcomes that they want? The biases, right? And in research, we see that all the time. We see these kinds of biases where people think, I know what the answer it is, and they move everythting towards that confirmation bias, which takes us to a whole other topic, right? How I absolutely open mindset. We call it growth, the growth and fixed
Yep.
mindset that from Carol Dweck. Have you worked in an organization where people tend to be critical, tend to be confrontational with ideas that are brought up, and how do you overcome that as in a leadership culture?
I've actually been pretty lucky where I haven't worked in those types of organizations. The organizations that I've worked in have been much more open-minded in that way. So, and I think that the organizations, the leaders that have hired me are more, they tend to be a little bit self-selecting
Mm.
because if you look at my website, I am not for everybody. So, if the more closed-minded types of
Yeah.
organizations are just not gonna hire me.
Right. Right. Yeah, our if I run into a leader, and I've had CEOs that wanted to hire us, and we've turned them down because of one value, one simple value that I expect in the leader, and that's humility. If they don't have a certain level of modesty, humility, humbleness, they're not going to listen to me. They're not going to listen to
Yeah,
my team. So why bother? I mean, you're going to
absolutely.
come in and go, "Oh, you didn't do anything to help." Well, that's because you're an idiot, and I can't help you, and you keep demeaning people when we're trying to improve leadership, improve creativity, improve strategic planning, whatever it might be, right? Pick a topic. But
Right.
they're the one in the room that's going to tell everybody what to do, when to do it, how to do it. Yeah, we just won't work with people like that. It sounds like you've been pretty careful, either them not wanting to work with you or you deciding, no, we don't want to fail either. We really want to help people, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, there's
Yeah.
gotta be a fit there.
Which I guess that's a great thing to finish this up with, is talking about fit. Have you worked with some people where they just didn't seem to have a creative bone in their body? They just
No, and here's the thing,
good.
Dr. Gary,
Yes.
is that everyone is creative. Now, most people have a belief, a self belief that they're not creative. When I give my keynote, there you go. When I give my Creating the Impossible keynote, I poll the room. And the way that I poll it so that nobody feels exposed is, do you think that most people think of themselves, have ever at any time in their lives thought of themselves as not creative?
Why do
The
you think that
whole
is?
room raises their
Yeah,
hand
sure.
or says
Why do you
yes.
think that is?
I think it's because partly because of this, in a large part because of our school system, and also because we live in a culture, we're swimming in this cultural soup that has this sort of binary around the idea of creativity, where there are the creatives, the artists, the dancers, the musicians, the actors. They're the creative ones, and everybody
Yes.
else is not creative. And the
Yes.
school system is set up so that in order to succeed at school, your job as a student is to please a single authority figure, the
Mhm.
teacher. And the way that you do that is not through your creativity, it's through following the rules.
Yeah.
And if you veer away from the rules, you're marked down. So you are
Yeah.
being trained out of creative thinking, of creative acting, of any kind of creativity for at least 12 years of schooling and beyond if you go to college and grad school.
So I have to tell you a couple of personal things really quickly. First of all, yes, I'm one of those. I never believed I was creative. And after completing 2 books, 6 leadership program development, I mean, we've done amazing things in the last 15 years with leadership development. But I go back to my high school days, and I was an occasional class clown. I'm not like somebody that makes stuff up, but when you say something, I'll say something that's funny, or I'll try to say something, which gets me in trouble at least 10% of the time. I'll say something really stupid, but I'm really, really good at apologizing. So I've also practiced that, right? So one day I'm in biology class and I said something funny, and my biology teacher did not appreciate it at all. And he went off on me, sit down, shut up. Don't you talk to me that way, which was kind of unusual for him because I'd been joking with him. I was a senior towards the end of the year. So at the end of class, everybody's leaving. I kind of wait back and I go back into the lab. And I said to my biology teacher, Mr. Frigola, I still remember his name. I said, Mr. Frigola, I want to tell you, I'm sorry for opening my mouth. Probably a bad time. I was just trying to keep things light. And he says, no, really, I just haven't been feeling well today. It's okay. I shouldn't have yelled at you like that, but just be careful. Okay. And I'm like, okay, cool. And I would rather be in that situation and have to apologize than never having to try to say something funny or say something light and show people that kind of levity as we go along. What strikes me is this: from a very young age, we're trained to avoid being wrong. If you think that you don't agree with that, just remember school. You didn't raise your hand to give the wrong answer and get praised for it. But innovation requires just the opposite. It requires the willingness to raise your hand, try something, and risk being wrong. So if organizations want creativity, leaders have to create environments that undo years of conditioning so that we can, well, sometimes just say stupid things and celebrate that and go on to the really, really good ideas. I never thought of myself as being creative. That's because, to your point, we often define creativity in terms of artists, musicians, and that kind of thing, as opposed to looking at situations and trying to figure out a creative way to get our point across and to be able to communicate. And that's what leaders need to do, utilizing emotional intelligence and good judgment in their decision making, interacting and connecting with people, and utilizing those opportunities to slow down, be more creative. And as you said, a metaphor or an analogy that helps them get the message across that the person will understand. That takes creativity.
Absolutely. And that's what my Create the Impossible framework is all about, my 3-step framework. play hard, make crap, learn fast. It's not about being an artist or, any kind of artist, creative, whatever. It's about leveraging that innate creativity that is part of every human. And it starts with play hard, which is getting into that mind space of being a little kid again, letting yourself experiment and explore, being in that space. That's what play hard is all about. And make crap is the antithesis of perfectionism. Letting yourself make crap, let it be crappy, let it be ugly, let it be terrible, because we need the crap to fertilize the good stuff. You can't get to excellence without, making those terrible first drafts and second drafts and third drafts. You have to make those first. And we all want to be like these excellent adults, but first we have to let ourselves make those terrible, awful, mediocre drafts first.
School put us into this process where you
Yes.
got to get A's, right? So you get information, you give it back. Get information, get it back. And if I'm a good student, I'm going to give it back in a way that I get an A. All right. So and but that's not real life. That's the problem.
No.
We're not we're conditioned for 12, 16, 20 years. For me, it's about
Yes,
25. It took me a long time. But anyway, so to conditioned to think within a box, within a certain thing, right?
that's right.
And the work that you do is getting people to break out of that. And I'm going to give you a really, really quick, simple example because I want people to understand that what you're saying about, let's see, what was it? What are your three things again?
Play hard, make
Play
crap,
hard, make
learn
crap.
fast.
Okay. The marshmallow challenge. Okay. It's
Yeah.
simple. 20, right? Spaghetti, build a tower, right? We do this in our boot camp. We had a construction company recently and end of the boot camp build marshmallows, towers, three
Yeah.
teams. At the end of 18 minutes, none of them had a tower. None of them. Okay. Engineers and architects build the highest towers because they've been trained on how. The second, if you've done this, you know who the second level is, right? Kindergartners. Kindergartners are
I
number
always heard
two.
that the kindergartners were number 1.
No, no. Engineers and architects are number one.
Makes sense.
Kindergartners are number two. They build something, falls apart. Build something, fall apart. They make 5 or 6 prototypes before other people make one because they have no idea what they're doing.
They're
They're just
trying.
playing. They're playing and making crap, Melissa.
Yes, exactly. But
Yeah.
do you remember, Dr. Gary, the first time in kindergarten, you get asked a question, you raise it, everyone is like, "Oh, I know the answer." But
Yes.
pretty soon, there start to become stakes. And when the teacher asks you to raise your hand, who has the answer, da, 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 you raise your hand and then you get shamed. Very
Yes.
early on, we start getting shamed. And guess what? When the teacher starts asking a question, you start not raising your hand anymore. And
Yeah.
that is what gets trained into us. So, we have been talking about yes and one of the methodologies that I've been trained in, and I'm actually a performer in this methodology, is improv.
Mhm.
And I'm such a huge believer in the power of improv, and that's one of the tools that I bring in to use with the teams that I work with, like the time traveler exercise that I talked to you about. That's an improv activity.
Yes.
People
Yes.
think when people hear improv, they think, "Oh my gosh, I'm gonna have to go up on stage and I'm gonna have to role play or something." That's not what it's about. It's about getting people to play. It's
Yeah.
about getting people to, let themselves make messes, because that's where the gold is. Because if you've ever seen an improv show where people make up scenes and stories, I'm not talking about stand-up comedy. I'm talking about where people get the improvisers get a suggestion from the audience and they make up a scene or they make up a story, or like my improv group, we make up a fully improvised musical from a suggestion from the audience. And guess what? The most fun part is when we make a mistake, because then we have to justify that mistake in real right there in real life in front of the audience in real time. Somebody calls me Emily and somebody else calls me Susie. Suddenly we have to figure out why I'm now both Emily and Susie at the same time. We have to figure out why that's true and make it real. And the audience loves that.
Yeah.
That is the beauty of improv, is taking a mistake and turning it into gold instead
Yeah.
of like, "Oh, it's over now. we blew it. It's ruined.
What the exercise actually shows is that the adults with the most expertise spent the most time planning and the least time trying. The kindergartners failed faster and built more. That's not a knock on expertise. It's a reminder that iteration beats perfection under the right conditions. Some leadership cultures are designed to reward the planning, not the trying and not the execution. And let's face it, it's the execution that gets you the results. What I'd like to ask you, Melissa, in your experience in working with leaders and making you can make a culture that's more fun,
Yes.
by doing some things in meetings that are a little bit lighter, a little more improv, let's say. Somebody's got something on their mind, at least being able to speak without, any concern for safety, as we talk about. What advice do you have or would you have for leaders today as we look at the challenges that we have with virtual meetings, with
Mm.
more technology, with all of these applications that are telling us what's going on, how to think, what to do. And there's a concern for me that we're going to become more and more dependent on these informational applications, which are fabulous to get us answers, but they're not creative at all.
Mhm.
Not really. I mean, they talk about it making pictures and stuff like that, but the important stuff, the human connection in
Yeah.
creativity, what advice would you have for leaders today?
Well, honestly, Dr. Carey, it goes back to my framework of get in that play hard, make crap, learn fast mindset. And if you are
Mm,
following that framework, then that is going to help with dealing with this influx, this expansion of technology. Because you're right, the tools are amazing, and it's great to utilize these tools, but they are not the same thing as creativity. And we want to make sure that we are utilizing our human creativity and our human connection. And that is going to be our sort of antidote and our superpower as the technology keeps ramping up and ramping up and ramping up.
yeah.
So it really comes down to what is our human superpower, and it is that creativity and that connection, and leaning into my Create the Impossible framework is really gonna help with that.
Well, it makes a lot of sense, and I think it'd be a real addition to any executive team. When I look at the teams that we've worked with, and developing their leadership capabilities, leadership development, the connection with other human beings, this is just another way for them to do it. Thank you, Melissa Dinwiddie. I appreciate your insights, your thoughts, and this is Dr. Gary, making good bosses into great leaders with compassionate accountability. Leadership isn't about having the best ideas. It's about building an environment where the best ideas can surface at the right time and in the right way. I don't want my surgeon to come up with a new idea of how to fix my hip. I want them to follow procedures so that I get through that. But there are times when we might be discussing new options, new opportunities, and having an environment to be able to do that in the right place at the right time is where leadership comes in. Join me every other Thursday as we break down bad boss behaviors and make good bosses into great leaders with compassionate accountability. I'm Dr. Gary, and this is Leading from the Front.